Aaron Glenn feels like the guy we've been waiting for. And I am not one to just turn the mic on and say, yay, we're the Mets, we're going to win, yay, we're the Jets. Usually, even if I'm optimism, there's that strain of, we'll see. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's some Jet fans being so negative, some people around here being so negative. I don't know if it's that I liked him as a player. I don't know if it's the clips I see of him. I don't know what it is.
Right.
But there's something about Aaron Glenn that is making me truly, honestly believe we have finally gotten the cultural changer that the Jet fan has waited for decades.
I would guess it's a combination of a lot of those things, but primarily it's familiarity. You feel like you know. Well, you do know Aaron Glenn. I was going to say you feel like you know him because he's been here and he was a player here, but that was as a player, not as a coach. But it still makes you feel like you know him. And you know what he's about, and you know what he's going to care about. And just based on how his career went, you can extrapolate in some ways what he's going to be like as a coach. And then you throw in the fact that you've heard some of his comments and, I don't know, imploring to his team. And you're like, all right, that aligns with what I already think. And so it just feels right because you know him already, I would guess. Now, secondly, and I didn't realize this until they were breaking down, I forgot what article I was reading, where he's been. He got coached under Bill Parcells, right? And Herb, we talked about. We talked about his time as a player. But then as a coach, it's been a lot of successful coaches, including Sean Payton and now Dan Campbell, and just the talent that he's been around with some of these staffs that he's been on. And you get influenced by that. And I was trying to think about this. Like, if I became a coach, what kind of coach would I be? Right? What would I draw upon? And obviously, I would draw upon one of the most successful coaches that coached me. That was Tom Coughlin.
Right.
And now I wouldn't be as hard, and you got to get there 5 minutes early. But I probably would have a level of accountability that meant taking your job seriously. And if you didn't take your job seriously, based on whatever metrics I decided to come up with, there would be a consequence, whether a fine or whatever it is. And so that's because that's how Tom Coughlin coached me. I would also be. You guys have to be accountable for the X's and O's. Like you can't mess it up. And that's just me being me. Like I wanted to be the smartest player that I could be on the field. Like, I wanted to know more than the guy I was going against. And so I would expect all of my players to be the same way.
Right.
And so I think Aaron Glenn has his own personal quirks that are to him, but you add those into all of those people that have influenced him over his years, and it's a lot of success that comes with him.
No doubt. And you mentioned it. He's learned from some of the best. Yep. I mean, Bill Parcells coached him, and Bill Parcells could not wait. Bill right now is not active. He's not around all the time speaking into microphones. Bill Parcells yesterday could not wait to say positive things about Aaron Glenn.
Yeah.
That means something. He doesn't have to do it. I mean, Bill could say, I barely remember him. He was pretty good. I liked him on Dallas and the Jets. I don't know.
Yeah, Bill's 83 now.
Right.
He's happily retired and chilling.
Yes, and he wants Aaron Glenn to be successful and believes he will be successful. Now, that's not an automatic, obviously, but it's a nice positive sign. Sean Payton, who's done a tremendous job in his career and has certainly done it transitioning over to Denver, had Aaron Glenn on his staff for 5 years. So you're right. Aaron Glenn got to learn from Sean Payton. He's now been on Dan Campbell's staff for 4 years. And the Dan Campbell one, believe it or not, excites me the most.
Because of the energy?
No, it's not even that. It's not even his personality. Here's why. Because the real reason deep down, and I think I could give you like 9 reasons, but I think one of the reasons I'm really excited about Aaron Glenn, and I think this is going to work, is because Dan Campbell's worked. Because the former player with no experience, with a staff that doesn't even have a lot of experience, changed the culture of an organization within a year. And Aaron Glenn lived it, and he breathed it, and he saw it. He did. He was there the entire time.
Yeah.
So he looks at Dan Campbell and says, well, that's another head coach who had no experience, a former player, who walked into one of the worst situations in football. One of the worst. We think about the Jets, we look at ourselves in the mirror and say, we're pathetic, we're sad, we're disgusting. What the hell were the Lions? And Aaron Glenn was on the bottom floor watching that turn around.
He also watched Dan Campbell make some tough decisions that first year. Let's not forget Anthony Lynn. Before Ben Johnson, it was Anthony Lynn.
Yep.
And he took the play calling away from Anthony Lynn. And then I think he did it himself. I think he called the plays himself. And so that was his first year.
Right.
And he basically fired his offensive coordinator his first year. Why? Because it wasn't working.
Right.
And so sometimes it just feels easier to just wait. We'll kick this can down the road. But I think one of the things you learned, if you're Aaron Glenn, from Dan Campbell is if you know it's not working, don't wait.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Anthony Lynn, and I don't mean to pick on Anthony Lynn, but he's very, very important in this conversation because Anthony Lynn was on the staff with Dan Campbell his first year in Detroit, and the perk of Lynn was that he was a former head coach.
Right.
So he brought that experience. Yippity-doo-dah. What the hell did that do in year one?
Nothing.
The Lions had one of the worst offenses in football, and to your point, Dan Campbell took play calling away and promoted the following year the tight ends coach by the name of Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson turns the Lion offense from 28th in the NFL to 5th in the NFL, and a few years later, after the Lions are successful, Ben Johnson leaves. And the reason I bring that up is now that Aaron Glenn is here, and we'll get into the GM stuff in just a few minutes, it's about building a staff.
Right.
And I've thought about this. I don't want someone who has head coaching experience for the sake of it. You know what I want on offense? I'm talking specifically about offense. I want the next Ben Johnson. That's what I want.
Yeah, it's just hard to identify those guys. There's plenty of names that are getting thrown around now. Clint Kubiak has been one of those names because of the success he had at least early in the season last year in New Orleans. It kind of got off the rails, as we all know, down there, and they fired their head coach. But it's hard to identify that person.
Well, that's the tough part. But you know what? For years, that's one thing and one conversation we haven't had around here. The conversation of losing a coordinator because they're so good.
Yeah.
Losing a coordinator because that guy did so much. So, look, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on Nick Cali, but I'm intrigued by Nick Cali because Nick Cali's never called plays. He's not an offensive coordinator yet, but he works for Sean McVay. And maybe Nick Cali, given the opportunity, is my Ben Johnson, is our Ben Johnson. And that's the truth, because I know we're going to talk about experience, and that's usually the big argument that's used against this hire. I've heard it from some of my fellow hosts. I've heard it from a lot of callers. You need experience, experience, experience. Experience is good, but that's not the end-all, be-all. You need innovators. You need success.
Yeah.
Detroit is our model. They are our model. Well, they put a guy on their offensive staff with experience, and he was gone within a year. And then they found their guy in Ben Johnson. So I know I go out on a limb and say Nick Cali's our Ben Johnson, because I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
But the signs are there, and that's what I want.
Nick Cali is the current tight ends coach / pass game coordinator for the Rams.
And guess what? That was Ben Johnson's title before he got promoted. He was the tight ends coach for the Detroit Lions. So what I'm envisioning right now, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually believe all this is going to happen too, which I never feel. We need to find our next great offensive innovator who 3 years from now gets the head coaching job for some loser franchise that's desperate to turn their team around. I'll leave that team blank. It could be anybody, the Giants, but that's what we need. And for whatever reason, and I promise you, I didn't say this about Robert Saleh. I had guarded optimism. I didn't say it about Todd Bowles. I had guarded optimism. Same thing with Rex. Adam Gase, I just wanted to stop watching football. I was so negative. But with Aaron Glenn, and maybe it's the hype video. The Jets put out a hype video yesterday. I showed it to my wife 3 times. And she's like, okay, the first 2 times were cool, but what are you doing here?
Right.
And I said, I love this man. I think this is the man that changes everything.
Yeah, the only thing, as I said yesterday, and I'll keep saying until they get one or get it figured out, you need the quarterback also.
You do. Now, here's the other thing, and this is how I know I've been so enamored by Glenn, like he's almost got this magic wand on my head. The fact that they haven't hired a general manager, which is pretty important, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't even bother me. I'm not annoyed about the fact that today they're interviewing Darren Moogie, who I honestly want to get the job just so Loogie could have a Moogie. Like, I don't know much about Darren Moogie other than he's an assistant in Denver, and I hope he's the next great GM. And the truth is, other than the research we all do over the next few days, we don't know much about any of these guys. But I don't know, like Moogie and Loogie, it just feels like it would work.
Well, you know, it's interesting.
Loogie!
You bring up the fact that there isn't a GM. We got a call yesterday, and I'm sure there were others who were on hold that we didn't get to, saying, I can't believe they hired a head coach without the GM. I think that's an antiquated way of thinking about football and an organization, because for so long it felt like owner and then there's the boss of the coach. That boss of the coach is the general manager, and he answers to this player, to this position, this head coaching job. But I think that slowly started to change, and it started to change with guys like Andy Reid. Obviously, in a bigger way, it was Bill Belichick, right? He was the king of, I'm coaching these guys. I want to bring the guys that I want, right? It's not, you can have a different thought about what this team should look like, but I'm the one that's in charge of coaching these guys and getting them to play the way that I want them to play. Why am I not the most important when it comes to player selection? You know what I mean?
And I agree.
And so Bill Belichick did that for years. Andy Reid did that. I remember having a conversation. What was their running back? I'm forgetting his name now. Deuce Staley. And Deuce was like, yeah, it's like really hard with Andy because he's my head coach. But then when it's negotiation time, he's telling me I'm not good enough.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it was always this like weird, like head coach but general manager situation, but it worked for Andy Reid.
Sure.
Right? And it's I don't know if it's the same in Kansas City, but I would surmise that it is with Brett Veach that's out there right now. It's Andy Reid wants his type of guy, and Andy Reid should be in charge of picking the guy that's going to pick the guys that he's going to coach.
Absolutely.
And I think that Aaron Glenn, given all the experience that we've talked about, has an idea of what he wants this team to look like. And so when they find a GM, that GM not answering to Aaron Glenn, but he's got to be accountable to Aaron Glenn.
Absolutely.
And so I don't mind this at all. And I feel like this is the way that the NFL is going to start going when you look at the head coach, general manager dynamic.
I also think if you look around the league right now, every setup is different. There is not a consistent setup by NFL teams.
No, you're right.
The New York Giants setup, not to say it's right or wrong, was let's get the GM first, Joe Shane. Let him hire the head coach, Brian Daboll.
Yeah.
Okay. Other teams do things differently. Look at what was tried to be explained today in Tennessee. They hired a general manager in Mike Borgonzi who's inheriting a head coach.
Yeah.
So
who's and to his his defense is only the first year as head coach.
I'm not saying you should replace him. I'm saying he took a job in which there was already a head coach in place. He's not hiring the head coach. You mentioned the situation in Kansas City. Obviously, the Dallas situation is crazy and different. Like every situation is different.
The one that really stands out to me is San Francisco, the 49ers. And Kyle Shanahan was the head coach. And then John Lynch, as an analyst, just watching tape with Kyle Shanahan over the years, realized I want to go do that.
Right.
And so it was like they complement each other. It's not like John Lynch has the power to like fire Kyle Shanahan.
Right.
It's not that dynamic.
Right.
It's a collaborative. We are working on something together. Hey, Kyle, what piece do you want to be the next running back or wide receiver? Running back's a perfect example. You know what? I'd love a guy like Chris McCaffrey. All right. He goes and trades for Christian McCaffrey. And now it hasn't worked out because of the injuries to C-Mac, but you know what I mean. It's not like John Lynch has the ultimate power over everything with the San Francisco 49ers. The head coach probably has more.
And when you look at the GM candidates and you look at the head coaching candidates, none of us know much about Lance Newmark. We don't know if he's the answer. Same with Darren Moogie or Trey Brown. We knew a lot about Thomas Dimitroff because he has a track record.
Yes.
But there was no, in my opinion, general manager target that I jumped up about and said, you got to get that guy. And I think the Jets agreed. But with the coaching candidates, there were. And Aaron Glenn happens to be one of them. I was also high on Brian Flores. So you get the coach you want. And then you bring in the general manager who's going to fit with that coach. So I don't think the Jets are jetting. I don't think they're doing it backwards necessarily. I think they targeted their guy who happened to play for this team for a bunch of years, and they got him.
And he's going to be the face. Let's face it.
Yes.
The head coach is the face of the organization. He's the one that gets in front of the media every single day. How often does the general manager talk? Once every 5 months?
Yeah, basically.
But, I mean, seriously.
Sometimes less.
Like, who is the GM accountable to other than the owner? The head coach is accountable to the day-to-day operations about everything. So if it's his job to be forward-facing and take all the shots as well as some of the platitudes when things go well, shouldn't he be in charge of what his team looks like?
Yes. I also want him coaching the kinds of players he wants.
Yes.
So
I don't mind this. I know people are, and they get bent out of shape about the dysfunction of some teams that hire the head coach before the general manager. But I think this is trending this way. I think you're seeing successful teams do it this way. And if we're talking best practices, as every business executive knows, you got to look at the teams that have been successful and what they've done.
Absolutely. And the teams that are giving me hope and excitement are the Detroit Lions and the Houston Texans, because they hired former players with no head coaching experience. They put together staffs that didn't have a lot of coaching experience, head coaching experience. And look at those two franchises. I know they haven't won a Super Bowl yet. I know they haven't gone on huge runs. The Lions obviously run ended in disappointment. But right now, as a Jet fan, that's what I want. I want to be good. I want to be watching playoff football in the middle of January. And the other thing I want, I'm going to take such pride in this, a year from now or 2 years from now, and I kind of have a feeling it's going to happen, I want to talk about the Jets losing their offensive coordinator because he got offered a head coaching job. I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
That is something I'm jealous of, because that means you've arrived. So as a Jet fan today, and this is not a normal day, usually it's hopeless and disappointment and
Same old Jets.
what did we do to deserve this? What God did I piss off? Things like that. Today I'm happy, and I believe. And we'll get to your phone calls. We will also hear, for the first time in less than a week, from Sean Borash. He is not dead. He is back. He is healthy. And when we come back, we're going to turn that mic on for him and let him say whatever he's got to say. I'm sure he's got a lot on his mind about Saquon Barkley, about the Jets, about Aaron Glenn, about Jaden Daniels. I personally can't wait. I'm glad to have Sean back. We will hear from him coming up.